You're fine, thank you. Senator Ludlam.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a few in similar vein on heat waves. I'm not sure whether this is the study that Senator Pratt was referencing, but the 2013 State of Our Cities report warned that heat wave deaths in Australian cities would double by 2050 but increase fourfold in Brisbane and Perth. Are you familiar with that particular projection or scenario?
We're certainly familiar with the city's report. I can't recollect the precise figures that you're referring to.
Okay. If you're happy to just
before me,
if you're happy to accept that I'm not misleading you, those are the basic metrics that they've put to us, which is pretty alarming. What's that? A leap of faith? No, come on. You've sort of acknowledged that heat-induced deaths are already on the increase in Australian cities. Which agency is primarily responsible for adapting to and mitigating heat wave deaths in Australia? Would that be you?
Well, similar to my response to Senator Pratt, there's an overall responsibility at the Commonwealth level for working with the states and territories, but in fact often the primary responsibility is down at the local health authorities level in terms of, detailed on-the-ground action planning.
So public health and safety in general, Senator, is the responsibility of the states,
yeah.
not the Commonwealth.
But what about for something peculiar like this? Because, of course, the State of Australian Cities report lays this increased projection of number of deaths and climate change, which is not...
It's
which
still
is a national responsibility, but you're saying not really.
Sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's still the responsibility of the states, but that doesn't mean that there's not information or or techniques of dealing with that are not useful to share. But the primary responsibility still remains with the states.
With the states. All right. I found that projection extremely alarming, and I'm just wondering whether the government had made any response to that particular metric of between double and fourfold increase in heat deaths in Australian cities. Was there any response as such?
Well, could I perhaps just reiterate the point made around our role being to deliver key information so that the nature of risk and how it's changing is better understood. And the department has been very active in the last 3 years, since the 2009-10 heat waves, to work closely to, in fact, get a national definition of what a heat wave was, which really wasn't in place before that time.
So it's happened now.
But there's been significant work done to get some common definitions, to work closely with the Bureau of Meteorology and across the relevant Commonwealth agencies to understand, what the nature of the risk is. And then clearly I think there's been engagement with the states and territories about the role of social services and vulnerable populations and how they're identified to make sure that those vulnerable people, can be looked after in such extreme circumstances.
All right. The definitional stuff is useful, and I gather that's already occurred. But what about mitigation or adaptation? I shouldn't say mitigation, I guess. What about adaptation? If mitigation's outside your remit, can you point me to anything that the Commonwealth has done to help people adapt, or cities or neighbourhoods adapt?
I think probably two things are worth mentioning, and the first one does go to the information base of an early warning system, and there has been action taken by the Commonwealth through the Bureau to start exploring how an early warning system for heat waves can be put into place. And I think that's a very critical information provision role of the Commonwealth.
All right.
And more broadly, in terms of adaptation, there has been discussions with the Department of Health and Social Services on these issues. But actions which need to be taken generally fall to state governments or local governments in terms of providing services and ensuring that vulnerable people are identified and looked after.
All right. I want to put a particular adaptation strategy to you, and I'm not expecting you to have this at the table, but the West Australian newspaper on the 20th of February tested relative impacts of urban heat island effects, tested the theory that the variation can be up to 4 degrees depending on the surroundings, and particularly the amount of tree cover. That in the areas or the suburbs that are more susceptible, the death toll will be higher, the relative rate of illness and impact will be higher. So, for example, in this particular piece on the 20th February, they found that areas of Mount Lawley were 5 degrees C hotter than areas of Mount Hawthorn where tree cover was much better. So that same State of Australian Cities report that I'm quoting from proposed increasing the amount of vegetation in the built environment and implementing green infrastructure. Can you point me to anything, apart from what the states and territories might be up to, can you point me to any lead that the Commonwealth has taken in response to that recommendation specifically?
We'll need to consult with other departments as well. We were happy to take that on notice.
All right.
To see if there's parts with our colleagues both in infrastructure and industry and in health and
Yep.
ourselves.
All right, it is quite cross-portfolio, but all right, I'm happy if you're able to take that on notice. Does that? Can I assume from that though that you're not immediately aware of anything within your remit that has been done in response to those proposals?
I'm not Senator. I'll just confirm with my colleagues. Okay. No, Senator, but we'll confirm on notice that that's the case.
All right. I put these questions or similar line of questioning to infrastructure and redevelopment and regional development last November in budget estimates, who actually are responsible for publishing that report. They hadn't heard of it either and hadn't done anything about it. So what I'm interested in, to cut to the chase, are proposals like that we have proposed in Perth, the Perth Greenways project, which is about deliberately increasing urban tree cover to reduce that urban heat island effect, which has a range of benefits, as you'd be aware. So I'd commend that study to you, the Perth Greenways study, and certainly look forward to anything that you're able to uncover as to whether these things are under active consideration.
I might just observe, Senator, that the government does have a 20 million trees program, and that also includes urban, sort of peri-urban trees as well.
Who's responsible for that specifically?
Well, that's in the Environment Department, and they'll be appearing later on, Senator, later on this evening.
Okay. I might be elsewhere, but maybe I could sort of pitch an on-notice question to those officers if they're watching the internal broadcast, whether a systematic process of cooling the heat island effect using native vegetation in particular is under consideration. I'll leave it there. Thanks for your time, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ludlam. Senator Russ.